Traditionally, we talk about placement in the high school, both science and math, during this parent coffee. This year, because there's many changes that have happened with our mathematics program and our pathways, we're moving science to May. So Mrs. K will be here in May to talk to us about science. It really hasn't changed, so I don't think it'll surprise everyone, but we always want to make sure we present the information to everyone so that you're aware. Today, we have Mrs. Pellegrino, Dr. Kaltenecker, and Dr. McGrath here to speak to us about the math placement process, the new pathways, not only how we have been impacted here, but the bigger focus is going into high school, how it plays out in high school. I think that's the next step in our process, and they're here to share this information with us. So without further ado.
Yep, so I'll just give a quick intro to the agenda today, but I want to say that thank you all for coming. We can never talk about math enough. Lisa and I could talk about it all the time. We could go on forever. We love talking about the work we're doing. We love doing the work. We love being in the classrooms and watching the students. Kim was just sharing being in a 7th grade classroom recently and talking about what she observed. And Lisa and I just smile because it's part of our vision is to get kids talking about mathematics. And Kim was explaining how she walked in and kids were having discussions about the math and talking to each other. And we know from research that kids learn more deeply when the amount of student dialogue goes up and teacher dialogue goes down. We want kids talking. And that's been some research in math for a long time, is creating the dialogic classroom where kids are having the discourse about it. So today Lisa has been working on the Math Pathways program for probably about 5 years now. We've put time into it. We're in our 2nd year of implementing the change in the shift in the middle school math program. And now that cohort of students that's currently in 8th grade will be coming to the high school. So it's important to talk about their experience at the high school, and that's what we'll be talking about today. Lisa has been spending the past several years preparing for that. So you'll hear about that. She will talk about the curriculum at the high school and what that will look like for students who are accelerated in mathematics and what options they have and what they will be studying. Also, what we'll be talking about is we asked Dr. McGrath to come and talk about the college piece, and is there an impact on students who are accelerated at the high school in terms of their experience in the guidance department and the college admissions process. So Mike can answer all your questions about that. These are things we've been thinking about as we've been making this change. So that's the big picture agenda. Feel free throughout the presentation to ask questions as Lisa's going through it or Mike's going through it, and we can certainly have more discussion at the end as well. So thanks again for coming.
So thank you for coming. Out of curiosity, how many folks have come before to Principal's Coffee or some sort of meeting about acceleration, just so I know? Okay. So for those of you that have been here, thank you for coming back and hearing my spiel a second time. And for those of you that have not been before, hopefully you'll be impressed with the work that we've been doing. I think we're really passionate about getting as many students as possible exposed to the highest levels of math and finding success and finding enjoyment. And I think that's something, as Tim has talked about, the transformations that are going on in the middle school already. That is something, even just from some cursory surveys of the students, we have already seen a dramatic shift in students' opinions on math, which is very exciting for us. So this next slide gives you an overview of our pathway system under our revised acceleration model. So you'll notice Math 6, similar to how it's been in years past with our tiered assignments, different opportunities for students to challenge themselves at levels that are appropriate for them in that moment. The biggest change is with our Math 7, where that used to be Math 7 and Math 7-8, but now it's what we kind of colloquially call Math 7 for all. Again, students still being challenged appropriately through both tiered assignments in class and also tiered assessments. At the end of Math 7, there's the first cohort for acceleration, and that goes into our now A track, or A pathway, sorry, that culminates in BC Calc. So the intent of that pathway is really to provide a rigorous foundation so that students are set up for success in BC Calculus. And for those of you that it's maybe been a while since you were back in the math college land, BC Calculus is equivalent to 2 semesters of college calculus. Okay, so it's an intense course. I will say another thing we've been doing as a math department for the past 2 years is visiting colleges. We've visited MIT, UPenn, Olin, and Michigan, and Binghamton, and that's the sequence of math that they are also working to help students find success in, even at a collegiate level. Okay, so it's definitely rigorous. Students that don't go into pathway number 1 will go into our pre-algebra course in 8th grade. Again, tiered assignments being given to those students, so they have varying levels of even down to homework. There could be 30 optional problems for homework, and students can choose ranges that are appropriate for them in that moment. So they come in, they get answer keys, they take a look and see where they are and are continually self-assessing to see, am I being appropriately challenged? And then that translates to the assessments as well. Those students will come up to the high school, so next year will be our first cohort of a revised Algebra 1 cohort. So we will see those students for the first time in 9th grade next year. Continue on there with our tiered assignments. So students will come in. The first quarter, always an adjustment to high school, and we'll be working with them through that. And then from kind of the second quarter on will be when the tiered assignments will start to really ramp up. And again, students will be able to choose throughout the year what is the appropriate level of challenge for them. That will open up our pathway number 2, and those students will go into a pathway that will culminate in either AP Calculus AB or non-AP Calculus. So just as a refresher for that, AP Calculus AB is 1 semester of college calculus, as opposed to the 2 that are BC Calc. And then the non-AP Calculus usually covers between 2/3 and 3/4 of the AP Calc AB curriculum. If a student does not go into pathway number 2, that would be what you are probably most familiar with, which is your traditional pathway that ends in pre-calculus senior year. Okay. Oh. So I'm going to kind of zero in on that pathway number 2 to give you a little bit of an understanding of what is the content in there, because the first question I think that people have is, are you just jumping to pre-calculus? What happened to that foundational things from geometry, algebra 2 that you remember? Like, where did that go? And it definitely did not disappear. Everybody got their, I know people are taking pictures in the slides. I want to make sure everybody got their pics there. This is like Disney. I want to make sure you get all your pictures in. So this is our kind of graphic display of how are we making decisions for what we call that 3 and 2 curriculum, which is 3 years of high school math consolidated into 2. So option 1 is we just talk really fast every day, but that didn't seem like a great option. So what we did was instead look at what is really requisite for students. And there's 3 things that kind of feed into that. The first is SAT and ACT. So what do students need to know to be successful on those exams? So if you come into the math office right now and you look around the room, we have index cards with all of the subtopics organized under content, and there's a little code on each of those index cards. An S if it's on the SAT, and an A if it's on the ACT, so that when we're revising this curriculum, we make sure we're not leaving anything out that the students need. So that's the first thing that will inform that curriculum. The second is requisite knowledge for science. So I actually just sat down with the physics folks yesterday for about an hour talking about our revised pathway, talking about what are the skills and mathematical items that students are going to absolutely need for their coursework, so that we make sure that we're not putting students at a disadvantage for their science work. The third piece, probably the most formative, is what do students need to know for calculus? Now, Tim said we could talk about math all day, and we certainly can, but we recognize that everything we do in math isn't leading up to calculus. Some of it is just good for abstract thinking. Some of it is better for statistics. So we're really looking at what is going to put students in a pathway for success to study calculus. So there's some topics, when I talked about how are we going to squeeze those 3 years into 2, there's some topics that while we love them as mathematicians, they're not vital, for calculus, and they're not needed on the SAT or ACT. So that allows us to really focus in on the topics that students are going to need in order to be successful at that calculus level. So those are the three things that are feeding into it. So those topics come from geometry, algebra 2 trig, and pre-calculus. We also benefited greatly from the idea that algebra 2 trig and pre-calc have a lot of overlap in topics, and so that allowed us some flexibility in terms of timing. The geometry piece, while things are kind of woven throughout those 2 years, I do want to highlight that geometry piece is the piece that's going to come first in that 3 and 2, and it's important to highlight because that is the piece that is most requisite for the SAT and the ACT. So rest assured, students will have access and exposure to that material before they sit down for the exam. The algebra 2 trig and pre-calculus piece is where you see a lot more interwoven. We're going to build not just on discrete skills, but really overarching concepts, and what do we want students to walk away from those that 3 and 2 pathway knowing before they go into calculus. So why did we call it pre-calc 1 and pre-calc 2? Why didn't we just call it geometry / algebra 2 / pre-calc? And the reason for that is if you were a student that was on that A pathway, and for whatever reason, sometimes we have students on this pathway and they get really involved with something like science research, which it can be a huge time commitment for students. And they might decide, I thought this pathway was for me, but for whatever reason, I don't feel that it's my primary goal right now, and we want to give students flexibility to be able to move down. And we had some great feedback from our initial focus groups from parents, and one of the biggest things that came out was if a student does move down, they don't want it to reflect poorly on them, where it looks like they're repeating a course, right? So if they went down from, for example, geometry A and then into a course that had the word geometry in it, from college standpoint, we don't want to give the impression that now they're repeating a course. So that was really the rationale behind calling it pre-calculus 1 and pre-calculus 2. But rest assured, that is certainly going to still contain those topics from algebra 2 trig and also geometry. So that will feed into that. In addition, on the side here, you have New York State standards and local and national standards. Just as a reminder for folks in Byram, we do one Regents exam, that's the Algebra 1. So those students, that would not change. Either they take it at the end of 8th grade or the end of 9th grade. And then that kind of Common Core Algebra 1 piece would be finished. Students would have their Regents exam, and then they're free to kind of explore the higher level mathematics. So it's something we're really excited about. I will say we have done a tremendous amount of work so far on that curriculum. We have a lovely superintendent's conference day tomorrow that we will be really delving into this even more, moving our index cards around and making sure that we're making thoughtful decisions about that second pathway, because I want to make sure that students are prepared and that they're experiencing success. That is our biggest takeaway, is experience success at high levels of math.
A brief story, but it's important to put this into context. Approximately 25 years ago, our Board of Education members, our district or school leaders, our parents, and our faculty engaged in a very good discussion on rigor. We were in one place, but the norms of our village, and quite frankly, the demands of society, needed us to move from one place to another. So this journey didn't really begin today or 4 years ago. It sets in about 1995. I call it the beginning of the rigor movement. And I know this story from people that you know, or at least have heard about in fond ways. I've heard this from Dr. Jackie Taylor, Dr. Bill Donahue. I've heard it from Dr. Jen Lamy, who's been with us over 20 years. I've heard it from Tim. So I wasn't here, but I'm going to quickly capture a story I've been told. They had to move We had 4 AP courses in 1995. I'm very proud to announce we have 23. We didn't have global scholars. It launched 2 years ago. It's amazing. Science research was beginning at that time. So I want to thank those former Board of Education members, those principals, those teachers, those chairs, for beginning a movement that brings us to this point in time. Now, to this, and there's 2 competing norms in American life and in schooling. There's excellence and there's equity. Frequently, we choose one or the other. The wisdom of the people I'm talking about for the last 25 years, they didn't see those normative values in conflict. They said we can provide high levels of excellence and high levels of equity at the same time. And that's what this does. Instead of one way to the promised land, there's now 2. Now to the colleges, what do they want? I'll start with admissions, and a little later we'll talk about matriculation. They want more and more Byram Hill students to take pre-calc, calc, or AP Calc. And this gives us a second opportunity. Again, it's excellence. These are excellent courses. And it's providing more equity. So when you think about this later today or tomorrow, think about that. More excellence, more equity for all the children. It's going to help them first continue to get into the best schools. And once they are there, irregardless of major, it will make them better students. Now, the story comes to last night. When you're my age, you write things down. Like I'm going to CVS after this meeting, and I have 5 things written down. I'll tell you about the Q-tips. My wife and I need Q-tips. This comes from last night. Jen Lamia did a very nice presentation beginning the budget process. And you're going to hear this. Go to the meetings, join the discussions, read the budget. But this is a very important data element. The class of 2018, our most recent group that graduated this past June, 60% were accepted to Tier 1 colleges and universities, and 18% were accepted to Tier 2. A total of 78% of the last graduating class were accepted to the top 240 schools in America. I checked this morning knowing we'd be meeting. I checked the Department of Education website. There's 2,712 four-year colleges in America. If you're wondering what does it mean on a macro level, again, 60% to Tier 1, 18% to Tier 2. If we go back to 2001, it was only 20% to Tier 1 and 2. So I want to commend all these people. Some are in the room, like Tim and Kim. They were here for the transformation. The enhancements they've made have always been to the benefit of your children. And this is another great enhancement, again, both with respect to admissions, and then success with enrollment. One final point, and Tim asked me this question this morning, so I want to thank Tim. How do colleges know your daughters and sons have been in an advanced course? On our transcripts, we have something called tags. Every transcript has it. It's a box. If you ever come by my office, I can show you the tag box. It tells the colleges that Geometry A is an advanced course, or this is an accelerated course. And it's not just limited to mathematics. We have science research there. We have our Bio A there. And then colleges, of course, put it into their database, and they know us well now. So I'll close with this before taking more questions. Kudos to all the great leaders and faculty that have brought us here. And this is another great enhancement that will benefit your children and other children right now that are at Coleman Hill, Wampus, and so on. So thank you.